Today on CityCast Boise. With the Supreme Court's dismissal of the Idaho abortion ban case, folks have been left wondering what reproductive care they can expect if they have an emergency. State's newsroom reporter Kelsey Mosley Morris is here to break down what you need to know about the ruling and what healthcare is available now. Plus, do we still have one of the most restrictive bans in the country? It's Wednesday, July 17th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Hey, Kelsey, thanks for coming back on the show. Most people are probably aware that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Idaho in the abortion case, but people may not know exactly what that means, though.
Basically, at this point, it's kind of status quo of what it was before January. And so they're right to think that not a lot has changed, in part because the Supreme Court has put it back down to the lower courts. And when SCOTUS took up the case, they threw out a preliminary injunction that was protecting ER doctors from prosecution under this abortion ban. And that kind of threw things for a loop and made them different.
Yeah.
And now we are back to the fact that the injunction is still in place until further rulings from the Ninth Circuit, because basically SCOTUS took the case from the Ninth Circuit before it had a chance to actually ultimately rule. So we may end up in this situation again in, 8 or 9 months or maybe longer.
So it's not resolved in any kind of way. It's just
definitely not.
But we have the injunction. And so with that injunction, you can get an emergency abortion in Idaho, correct?
Correct. There are probably still situations where there will be some reticence just because of how the law is written and how the politics have been going. But the rate of transfers that we were seeing out of state will likely slow down because they do have this protection in place now from a court order.
Were you surprised by this decision? I mean, it was more of a dismissal than a ruling, but were you surprised by it?
I can't say I was surprised because it's the least politically risky option, especially given how things have been going in states where there have been ballot initiatives and states where there have been pro-choice or pro-life, whatever you want to call them, candidates on the ballot. The trend has been moving toward abortion rights. And so if you're looking at a court that is not wanting to be political in an election year when this is a very hot issue, then this was the likeliest scenario.
Yeah. Well, and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said that this decision isn't a victory for pregnant people in Idaho and is only a delay. Do you feel like that's a fair assessment?
Yes, because ultimately it may end up in front of SCOTUS again, or, there's just this kind of limbo for a while still. I think without health exceptions legislation, which may get pushed off further because of this, you're still finding situations where people are in urgent need of care and they're possibly going to get turned away, because there still isn't clear guidance on how to approach these situations. And I think during the arguments you heard justices say they weren't really getting clarity from the AG's office, who argued the case for Idaho, and they weren't getting a clear sense of where the line was for being able to intervene without facing prosecution. And I think that's still the case. And now you're feeling like in the wake of this decision, there was still the AG's office saying that doctors are lying or exaggerating about what they're seeing.
Oh, and I just want to clarify that's the Attorney General's office for anyone
Correct.
who, yeah.
Yeah. So there's still that tension and there's still that conflict going on. And it's hard for doctors to feel confident in what they're doing when that's still going on. And it's hard for pregnant people to feel safe when that is still going on. So without some kind of decisive ruling from a high court, you've still got a lot of ambiguity that people are dealing with.
So I think the elephant in the room are the implications for healthcare in this state. So what are the biggest implications from this dismissal or decision for people in Idaho?
Unfortunately, it's still kind of the way that it was last fall. before we had any kind of indication that the legislature wasn't going to take up abortion exceptions legislation or like health exceptions. As of January, the legislature said, or, legislative leaders said that they wanted to wait for this ruling before they made any other decisions on exceptions legislation. And without any kind of ruling one way or the other, it seems like that will continue potentially in the next session where there's just no action. And so you are still faced with a situation where doctors aren't coming here largely for new practices, for new jobs. We don't have OB residencies here. So all of our recruitment has to come out from other states. And other states are also struggling, if they have an abortion ban, to attract people to their residencies, even if they have them. So I fear that the situation as it was last year is just going to continue to deteriorate. And people will have longer wait times. People will have more delays in care. There will still be a lot of attorney consultations that will delay your care. And there will still be situations where a doctor might feel like they have to wait for you to progress really far into an infection before they can decide to intervene, which is something that they highlighted in the briefs of a situation where somebody's amniotic fluid got really infected and really, really terrible before that doctor felt like they could justifiably in court say that they terminated the pregnancy. And that feels really bad for the doctor, and it feels really bad for the patient. And so that's ultimately why you can see people deciding to go somewhere where it's safer for them to make those decisions before it becomes something terrible to witness and terrible to be part of. And so I think that's what people are worried about, is that this is just going to keep being a slow burn of people leaving and people not coming here to be replacing the people who are leaving.
And just to clarify for, anyone listening, like approximately half the population of Idaho needs OBGYN care, not just for pregnancy. That is an essential type of healthcare. So if we don't have OBs coming in and we have OBGYNs leaving, that is an issue for the people who need that healthcare in this state, whether they're pregnant or not.
Right. There was actually just one recently from OGA, which is one of the main OB providers in the Valley. One of my friend's doctors, actually, who has never been pregnant, doesn't intend to get pregnant. She really liked that doctor. And that doctor said, I can't justify being here anymore and I can't do it. And she left. So I don't even know if that's someone who was delivering babies, but, these people are making these decisions. They are potentially people who are wanting to start their own families and they don't feel safe personally trying to do that here. So it's not just about their patients. Sometimes it's about themselves too. And they are people with lives who want to have families.
I've seen a lot of discussion, Kelsey, about the idea that Idaho has the strictest abortion ban in the country. Is that true, or is that still true after the dismissal of this case?
Yes and no. We have some complicating factors to our laws that make it more high profile and make our ban more worthy of some public attention, including the abortion trafficking statute that is still blocked by the courts, but, was a model for a couple other states to pick it up. And I think that's where a lot of that comes from, is like these new ideas that kind of are hatched in Idaho and then become a model for other states to pick up on. But that's not the same as it being strictest. There are plenty of other states that have no exceptions for rape or incest, that have stricter prison time sentences, stricter fines, including Texas, I think, and Alabama. And some of them include other exceptions that we don't have. But, I think it's hard to say what's the strictest in the country because they're all strict in their own ways. And I think what's different about Idaho is the fact that we have been this kind of testing ground for ideas of further restricting abortion. And that leads people to think that it's the worst. But I think it's hard to call it that. And you can still believe that what we've got going here is very dangerous and very difficult for providers to operate in. while also recognizing that there are other states that have, 99 years in prison of in their statute for abortions, and that are actually calling abortion medication like controlled substances when they're not. Um, you know, there's a lot of gray areas that you can't capture in just calling a state law the strictest in the nation.
Spam sucks. It clogs your email, your text messages, and is a waste of time. Did you know that spam starts with your personal data being sold? When you get online, data brokers collect information like your phone number, social security number, even your health and financial records. They sell your info to businesses, and then they use your personal info to target you. If you're sick of spam and scammers, you should check out Incogni. That's Incogni. They scrub your info so it can't be sold. It takes just a few minutes to set up an account, and they have a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you have nothing to lose but spam and scammers. Protect your data, time, and sanity. Use code CityCast for 55% off the annual plan at Incogni.com. That's Incogni.com. Kelsey, how has our Attorney General, Raul Labrador, responded to this decision?
Largely, he said he agreed with Justice Samuel Alito's opinion, which was ultimately that the case should have been decided in favor of Idaho, and it should have made it clear that emergency abortions were never part of EMTALA. It was never supposed to be considered because EMTALA specifically calls out protection of the unborn child in its rulemaking. And so I think for Attorney General Labrador, he's on the same page as that. Like, it should have been decided this way and not kicked back to the lower courts. But he also said that the situation in Idaho is not as bad as doctors are proclaiming. And he has said that doctors are being misled by pro-abortion lawyers. I think he's including Planned Parenthood in that, because there have been some lawsuits in Idaho from Planned Parenthood that are still ongoing. He said there were considerations of like malpractice that doctors were not understanding correctly and that they were misapplying it to these situations. And I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, but it's not something that I've heard from doctors. It's not really the consideration that they're talking about. And he's also said in the past that some of the ER doctors who would actually be handling these situations have not talked to him. So I'm not quite sure who he's hearing from when he talks about these things. But he also said that there have been exaggerations and lies from these doctors because they want to misinterpret the law, and they have bad faith, basically. And that the ones who left the state are just wanting to be able to provide abortions because they make money off of them, which he did not provide any evidence for. He just said was implied because they were leaving over the abortion ban. His rhetoric on this is very much out of step with the doctors, and you can kind of see why that conflict is happening.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was any maybe pushback or response from the medical community. I mean, he even specifically said that the emergency life flights to Utah were unnecessary and called maybe their, doctor's medical judgment into question. And I was just wondering if there's been any pushback on that.
There has, but it's often from the same people. And I would say that that's one of the hard things about all this discourse, is that it's coming from the same 2 or 3 doctors who are willing to be outspoken, but some of them are family physicians who are not often on the front lines of these things. And the ones who are on the front lines are not as willing to be public with their comments. So, Dr. Lauren Colson said, that's absolutely not the case when it comes to like doctors leading over the abortion ban because they want to provide abortions for money. That's not what's going on, is what he said. But I haven't seen a whole lot of other organized type of pushback on those comments, which is hard because it just kind of lets them sit there. And the thing I'll say about the unnecessary transfers is, to some people, they would be unnecessary. And to some people, you would read the statute and say, this person has an infection. It's going to get worse. They're not even close to viability on their pregnancy. So it makes sense to terminate the pregnancy. And that is fair. That is a fair interpretation of the statute. But what these doctors are saying is that there could be someone else in the room who does not think it's a reasonable situation for that to happen in. There could be someone else who thinks abortion is never okay in any scenario, ever. And that includes potentially Justice Alito and, people who aren't as experienced in ER care or people who are just bystanders. That is what they are worried about, is those people deciding that they know better and bringing a court case or even bringing a civil case and winning, because there's not an established precedent for what that means. And there's not a good faith situation between the state's top litigator and doctors. So it's hard to say that these are unnecessary or that they are safe from prosecution when you've got this type of rhetoric going back and forth and there's no trust between a lot of these people. So that the patient gets caught in the middle of that.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot on the lines for the doctors. There's potential jail time, lawsuits, loss of license. So you absolutely want to be 100% sure if you're putting that all on the line. And that's difficult to do in a medical situation. There are very few sure things.
And you're working against a clock, a body clock that you have no idea when it's going to take a turn.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for those doctors, it's like you are safer taking this flight and going somewhere where they can act quickly and without consulting a lawyer so that they can help you fast, which we can't do here.
Yeah. So since the Supreme Court dismissed this case, can you break down a little bit what is going to happen next? Where is it going? Maybe what can we expect?
The case remands back down to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is one step below the district court where this went first, which is a federal court. What happened last year was that a 3-panel judge from the Ninth Circuit decided to lift the injunction and ruled in favor of Idaho. And that was a 2-week period where there was at least one transfer that happened because of that ruling. But 2 weeks after they issued that ruling, the full Ninth Circuit decided to take the case in what's considered en banc, or what's called en banc, which means a randomly selected panel from across the Ninth Circuit will look at the case again. And that often happens because they think it was either incorrectly decided or too hastily decided or something along those lines. So that is the hearing that they'll have at some point in the near future. That is the hearing they were scheduled to have in January, right before SCOTUS took the case. So that will move forward. And then, according to what I've been told procedurally, once that hearing happens, it can take 6 to 8 months before a ruling is issued from the en banc panel. And that seems to comport with what I've seen from other Ninth Circuit decisions, whether or not they're en banc. So we'll have at least that long, I'm guessing, before anything comes from them. And then at that point, I think it could be appealed to SCOTUS again. So that would be sometime next year. And whether it would make it for the summer term, I don't know. But that's what we're looking at now.
So currently, emergency abortions are allowed in Idaho, mostly allowed in Idaho. There is some gray area there. Does it seem like that will stay in place while this case moves through the courts again?
Yes, because SCOTUS actually put it back in place with their ruling. So they were the ones who lifted it. They put it back in place, and it will stay like that while we await the court decision. So for at least the next 6 to 8 months, if not longer, that will be how it stays, as far as I understand.
Okay, so for about the length of a pregnancy,
Yeah.
things will just kind of be in a holding pattern.
Correct.
Is there anything that people in Idaho or pregnant people in Idaho should anticipate or, do during this time to maybe protect themselves or in anticipation of future rulings, make decisions?
Well, I've written in the past couple months about potentially buying Life Flight or Air St. Luke's insurance. And that can give you some added peace of mind if you do need to be transferred. If you are unsure about your insurance coverage, what that would look like, then it's a good investment from what I've been told. It's not that much money per month and it covers your whole family. So even if there was something else to happen, it's not a bad thing to have in your back pocket regardless, especially if you do outdoorsy stuff or anything. So it's worth considering if you're someone who's going to get pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant. And I would just say be engaged, be informed about the upcoming election. Know that in November, the people who are going to the legislature will be elected in that election. And so if this matters to you, if this is something that you care about and want to see change, then that should be a factor in how you approach the upcoming election. And then after that, it's about talking to your legislators and telling them how you feel about this issue, because I think a lot of times they're only hearing from doctors or they're only hearing from activists, and they're much more likely to listen to somebody who's just a regular average person who cares about this issue.
Thank you. I think those are some great tips. And thank you so much for coming back to break this down for us and let us know what we can maybe expect in the future.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, we would love it if you'd tell a friend about us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with your guide to a popular water park. Catch you then.